What happens when Donald Trump walks into a small-town farmers' meeting and one bold farmer dares to challenge him face to face? The debate got heated, but what happened next left everyone speechless. This is a story you don't want to miss. It was just another ordinary afternoon in a small, sleepy farming town somewhere in the heart of America. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and the rhythm of life is set by the seasons rather than the clock. Dusty boots tapped on the worn wooden floors of the community hall, carrying the faint smell of hay and soil that clung to farmers even after a long day in the fields. Tractors hummed in the distance, a low, steady reminder of the work waiting outside. Inside the hall, farmers gathered in clusters, some leaning against wooden benches, others folding arms, as they exchanged low murmurs about crop prices, equipment costs, and the unpredictable weather that had been wreaking havoc on their fields for months. The mood was tense but routine. Discussions like this happened all the time, yet nobody expected that afternoon to turn into something unforgettable. Suddenly, a low rumble interrupted the quiet chatter. The farmers paused mid-conversation, straining to see through the dusty windows. A convoy of black SUVs emerged from the gravel road, rolling slowly but purposefully toward the hall. Tires crunched against the stones with a sharp, almost dramatic sound, and the engine's hum seemed louder than normal in the stillness of the town. Then, in a scene that seemed pulled straight from a political drama, the doors of the SUVs swung open. Out stepped a man who immediately commanded attention even without speaking. Former President Donald Trump himself, clad in a crisp dark suit, his signature red tie perfectly in place, and that unmistakable confident stride, walked toward the community hall. His presence was magnetic, and the farmers' murmurs grew into audible whispers. "What's he doing here?" one farmer finally asked, incredulity in his voice. A few others exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to feel excitement, skepticism, or both. Nobody in this small town had expected a former president to make a personal appearance at their routine community meeting. Trump didn't pause, didn't acknowledge the whispers. He strode straight to the front of the hall with a purposeful gait and raised his hands slightly to call for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice strong and commanding, cutting through the chatter. "I'm here because farmers are the backbone of America, and I want to hear directly from you." The room fell completely silent. Even the hum of distant tractors seemed to fade. Every eye was on him, every ear straining to catch his words. Farmers who had spent decades tilling the land and weathering storms now found themselves facing one of the most famous figures in the country. The air was thick with anticipation, tension, and a little disbelief. Then, as if on cue, one farmer rose from his seat. He was a tall, rugged man with weathered skin and a determined expression. A man who had spent his life working the soil from dawn till dusk. The room seemed to lean in as he removed his wide-brimmed hat, placing it carefully on the bench beside him, and looked Trump straight in the eye. "Mr. Trump," he said, his voice firm but respectful, "with all due respect, politicians come here, make promises, and then leave. We're left struggling with rising costs, low crop prices, and rules that make it harder to survive. Why should we believe you're any different?" A collective gasp ran through the room. Some farmers whispered agreements, others nodded in quiet support. The boldness of this single farmer to confront a man of Trump's stature was electrifying. For a moment, it seemed as though the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Trump's gaze didn't falter. He leaned forward slightly, hands gripping the podium, and replied in his familiar, confident tone, "Because I've always fought for the American worker, and farmers, believe me, are some of the hardest workers I've ever known." But the farmer was not done. He leaned closer, his frustration apparent, and said, "Talk is cheap, Mr. Trump. While you make speeches, we lose land, profits, and sometimes even hope. Do you understand what it's like to pour your life into soil that may not even give back enough to feed your own kids?" The hall was electric. Tension and anticipation crackled in the air like static. Some of the older farmers shifted uncomfortably, recalling their own struggles and debts. Others silently admired the courage it took to confront a former president so directly. Trump's jaw tightened for a moment, and then he responded, his tone firm, yet surprisingly reflective. "You think I don't understand struggle? I've faced setbacks, been doubted, and been told I couldn't succeed, but I fight back, and that's exactly what you do every day." Back and forth the words flew, passion clashing with conviction, experience challenging authority. The debate had become heated, but it was clear that something deeper than politics was unfolding. This was not just a disagreement, it was a collision of lives, perspectives, and truths, right there in the middle of a quiet American town. And just when the tension seemed about to reach a breaking point, something remarkable happened. An unexpected shift that no one in the room, not even the bold farmer, could have predicted. The farmer was tall and rugged, the kind of man whose hands told stories his words never could. Deep, sun-weathered lines carved across his face like a map of years spent under the relentless American sun. This was John Miller, a third-generation farmer whose family had worked the same land for nearly a century. Every corner of his farm, every field and fence, carried the sweat and labor of generations before him. And today, he was standing in a room full of peers ready to voice what everyone had been feeling, but none had dared to say aloud. John slowly rose from his wooden bench, his broad shoulders casting a shadow across the floor. The hall seemed to hold its breath as he removed his hat, placing it carefully on the table in front of him. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, met Trump's with a mixture of defiance and challenge. "Mr. Trump," John began, his voice steady but commanding, "with all due respect, politicians come here, make promises, and then leave. We're left struggling with rising costs, low crop prices, and government rules that make it harder for us to survive. Why should we believe you're any different?" A ripple ran through the room. Some farmers shifted in their seats, others leaned forward, eyes wide. The weight of John's words hung heavily in the air. It was a statement that struck at the core of their frustrations, the unspoken truth that they had felt for years. Nobody outside the farming world truly understood their struggle. Trump adjusted his tie, a subtle gesture that did little to hide the intensity in his gaze. Leaning forward slightly, he responded, his voice firm and familiar, yet tinged with a rare note of sincerity. "Because I've always fought for the American worker. And farmers are workers too, some of the hardest workers I've ever met." The room was quiet for a heartbeat, but John wasn't done. His frustration, years of hardship bottled up into a single voice, boiled over. He raised his tone, letting every word carry the weight of lived experience. "Talk is cheap, Mr. Trump. While you're out there making speeches, we're losing land, losing profits, and some families are losing everything. Do you even understand what it's like to put your life into soil that may not even give back enough to feed your own kids?" The hall shifted with tension. Heads nodded in agreement. Whispers of support passed among the farmers. The murmurs weren't just about the words, they were about recognition. For once, someone was daring to confront power directly, without fear or hesitation. Trump's expression tightened, and for a moment, it seemed the debate could tip into something explosive. But then he leaned forward, his voice resonating with conviction. "You think I don't understand struggle? I've had my businesses attacked, I've been doubted, I've been told I can't win. And yet, I fight back. That's exactly what America's farmers do every single day." The clash of perspectives crackled through the room. On one side, Trump stood, unyielding, his confidence filling every corner of the hall. On the other, John represented generations of farmers who had seen promises made and broken, lives invested in fields that refused to yield. The conversation was no longer just a debate, it was a confrontation between experience and authority, between lived hardship and public influence. Some farmers cheered for Trump's strong defense, clapping softly in agreement, impressed by his determination and energy. Others leaned toward John, their faces tight with recognition and empathy, silently applauding the courage it took to speak so bluntly to a former president. The tension was palpable. It felt as if the walls themselves were listening, holding their breath along with everyone inside. Minutes stretched like hours. Words volleyed back and forth, each side unwavering. The debate seemed endless, yet it carried a strange rhythm, a mixture of anger, respect, and the unspoken hope that this encounter might lead to something more than speeches and platitudes. Then, just when the crowd was certain that the argument would escalate further, something unexpected happened. Trump paused. His eyes softened for the briefest moment, as though he were seeing John not as an adversary, but as a man, a farmer, a father, a caretaker of generations of land. The room went quiet, sensing the shift, waiting for what would come next. It was clear, this confrontation was about to take a turn nobody in the hall could have predicted. The fiery debate, charged with frustration and conviction, was on the brink of evolving into something entirely different, something that would surprise everyone and leave a lasting impact on both the farmers and the former president. Part 3. John finally slammed his rough, calloused hand onto the worn wooden table, the sharp thud echoing through the room. The sound cut through the murmurs and whispers, drawing every eye toward him. "Words won't plow our fields, Mr. Trump. Action does," he declared, his voice ringing with frustration and determination. For years, farmers like him had endured promises that never materialized. Now he wasn't just speaking for himself. He was voicing the collective frustration of an entire community that felt overlooked and unheard. The hall was thick with tension. Even the air seemed to pause, heavy with anticipation, as though everyone present were holding their breath. Some farmers leaned forward, gripping the edges of benches. Others crossed their arms, faces tight with expectation. The former president had faced many challenges in his life, but this was different. This was not a political rally. This was real, tangible struggle, and John Miller had dared to challenge him in the heart of his own town. Then, unexpectedly, Trump paused. For the first time that day, the room didn't feel charged with confrontation. Instead, a strange hush fell over the crowd. Trump's eyes locked with John's, and in that instant, something changed. His gaze softened, not in weakness, but in acknowledgement of the man standing before him. And then, in a tone calm yet commanding, he spoke. "Then show me," Trump said. "Show me your farm. Show me your fields. Take me there right now." The room went silent once again. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the farmers. Was he serious? No one had expected such a response. Many had imagined Trump would respond with more speeches or promises, but instead, he wanted to see reality for himself. A small ripple of excitement mixed with skepticism spread through the crowd. This wasn't just talk anymore. This was a challenge, and he had accepted it. Within minutes, a convoy of pickup trucks roared to life. Dust clouds swirled around the tires as Trump, John, and a small group of farmers drove down the winding dirt roads leading to John's farm. The landscape passed by in a blur of golden fields, weathered barns, and scattered farm animals. Chickens clucked nervously as the vehicles rumbled past, and cows raised their heads lazily, observing the unusual procession with quiet curiosity. The sun hung low, casting warm amber light over the fields, illuminating the crops that had been tended with years of blood, sweat, and tears. As they arrived, John guided Trump across the farm, pointing out areas of concern, patches of soil that had been rendered infertile by drought, irrigation channels that needed repair, and fences that were long overdue for maintenance. Trump listened intently, nodding, occasionally crouching to feel the earth. There was no fanfare, no cameras, no speeches, just the two men walking across the fields, discussing the challenges of real farming life. Then Trump stepped onto the soil itself. He bent down slowly, letting the dirt sift through his fingers as if trying to absorb the essence of the land. The sun highlighted his features, casting shadows that gave him an almost reflective look. "This," he said, letting the words resonate, "is the real America." For the first time that day, John saw something in Trump that went beyond the polished, confident public persona. There was respect, genuine, palpable respect. He wasn't just a politician visiting a farm for a photo op. He was a man trying to understand, trying to see the struggles from the farmer's perspective. It was an unexpected shift, one that disarmed John in a way that no argument or speech could. As they walked among the crops, John spoke about the challenges he and his family faced: the unpredictable weather, the rising cost of equipment and fertilizers, and the pressure of maintaining a farm that had been in the family for generations. Trump listened carefully, asking questions, nodding, and sometimes pausing to consider the implications. The conversation was no longer a debate. It had become a dialogue. Other farmers watched from the edges of the field, some from a safe distance, others following cautiously. Their eyes widened as they saw the two men exchanging ideas, discussing real solutions, and connecting over the shared love and responsibility for the land. There were no cameras, no cheering crowds, just an honest encounter between a farmer and a former president, grounded in reality and mutual respect. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the fields glowed like liquid gold, and a quiet understanding had formed. John had seen Trump in a new light, not as a distant political figure, but as someone willing to step into the dirt, face the challenges firsthand, and acknowledge the hard work of those who feed the nation. And for Trump, it was a reminder of what he had always claimed to fight for, the heart of America, beating strongly in places like this farm, nurtured by people who never gave up. The moment lingered in the air, unforgettable in its simplicity and its power. For John and the farmers watching, this was a turning point. A day that started with heated words had evolved into something entirely unexpected, a shared understanding born out of the soil itself. As they moved slowly across the golden expanse of John's farm, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the fields, John began to speak with a mixture of pride and frustration. He gestured toward the rows of crops, some thriving, some struggling under the unpredictable climate. "Fertilizer prices have gone through the roof this year," he said, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "The weather's no longer reliable, droughts, floods, storms hitting when you least expect them. And on top of that, debts keep piling up. Small farms like mine are barely scraping by." He stopped near a piece of broken machinery, rusted and idle, its metal frame scarred by years of labor. "This tractor," he said, shaking his head, "I can't even afford to replace it. And without it, certain jobs are nearly impossible. It's a constant fight just to keep the farm alive." Trump listened attentively, walking beside John with his hands clasped behind his back. He nodded at the descriptions of hardship, his gaze following the lines of the fields and the machinery that had been a lifeline for generations. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer quick fixes or empty reassurances. For once, words were secondary. The silence between them carried weight, filled only by the crunch of boots on soil and the distant lowing of cows. Finally, John stopped and turned toward Trump, eyes searching. His tone carried the weariness of someone who had lived this struggle for decades, but also a challenge. "Do you still think farmers have it easy?" Trump shook his head slowly, the lines on his face softening. "No," he said with sincerity. "I think you're fighting one of the toughest battles in this country. And I'll be honest with you, John, I came here to talk. But today, walking beside you, seeing this land, the work, the struggles, I've learned more than I ever could have in Washington." For a moment, John just stared. He had expected speeches and promises, but not honesty, not a willingness to listen and understand without filters or fanfare. There was a pause, a quiet understanding that neither man needed to speak to feel the weight of the moment. That simple acknowledgement changed everything. The farmer who had earlier stood defiantly, questioning Trump, now saw him in a different light. He was no longer just a politician, a figure of authority, or a man known only through headlines and rallies. In that field, under the warm sun, Trump was a human being willing to step onto someone else's soil, to see their challenges firsthand, and even get his hands dirty if needed. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. The tension that had filled the room during the debate had melted into mutual respect. Words had given way to understanding. Arguments had given way to insight. And in that space, something rare was born, a genuine connection. For the first time that day, the clash of opinions became secondary to the shared reality of hard work, sacrifice, and perseverance. The debate had shifted from confrontation to conversation, from disagreement to empathy. And as they continued walking side by side across the fields, it was clear that this moment, grounded in soil and sweat, would be remembered far longer than any speech ever could. As the sun dipped low over the horizon, casting the fields in a warm golden glow, the day's tension began to soften. Shadows stretched long across the land, painting the crops and farm equipment in a quiet serenity that contrasted sharply with the heated debate that had erupted just hours earlier. Trump turned toward John and the farmers who had followed them to the edge of the fields. His voice carried the weight of both reflection and sincerity. "I can't promise miracles overnight," he said, pausing to let the words sink in. "But I can promise this. I'll never forget what I saw here today. And if I have the chance, I'll fight for farmers like you who refuse to give up." A hush fell over the crowd. Every farmer present seemed to lean in, listening not just to the words, but to the tone, the intention behind them. It wasn't a campaign speech. It wasn't a carefully crafted soundbite. It was acknowledgement, respect, recognition of the struggles, sacrifices, and unwavering determination of those who had devoted their lives to the land. John Miller, the man who had dared to stand up and challenge a former president earlier that day, felt a shift within himself. He extended his hands slowly, the gesture heavy with significance. For a heartbeat, the entire group held its collective breath. Would John pull back, holding to skepticism, or would he close the gap, offering a handshake that symbolized understanding and mutual respect? Slowly, deliberately, John reached out. Their hands met firmly, a handshake that conveyed more than politeness. It was a bridge built between two worlds. The farmer who had once challenged Trump's words now stood shoulder to shoulder with him, two men acknowledging each other's humanity, efforts, and resolve. The farmers who had gathered nearby erupted into applause. It wasn't the kind of applause reserved for political victories or grand promises. No, this was something different. It was applause born from validation, from the rare feeling of being truly seen and heard. For these men and women who had spent their lives battling unpredictable weather, financial strain, and bureaucratic red tape, this moment carried immense significance. Later, back in the community hall where the day had begun, John spoke to his neighbors, his voice carrying pride and a newfound calm. "You know what?" he said. "I may not agree with Trump on everything, but today he came here, he listened, and he walked my fields. That means something." Word of the encounter spread quickly, first through the town, then far beyond. Some labeled it political theater, while others insisted it was genuine. But for the farmers who had witnessed it, the debate, the tension, and finally the handshake, it was something unforgettable. A memory etched not in headlines, but in the soil, sweat, and shared human experience. Because in that dusty field, amidst crops and livestock, a heated debate transformed into an unexpected bond. It proved that even the loudest clashes, the fiercest arguments, could give way to understanding, respect, and connection when people truly listened to one another. And that, my friends, is the story of how Donald Trump and a farmer had a heated debate, but what happened next was completely unexpected. An inspiring reminder that sometimes understanding comes from walking together, shoulder to shoulder, across the very land we fight to protect.